here in my hands, I hold the brand new GoPro Hero 12 Black. Or at least I think I do. Until I take the wrapper off this, I can't guarantee it's the Hero 12 Black. It would be awkward if it wasn't. In this video, I'm going to do a complete unboxing and setup of the GoPro Hero 12. Since this is a rather long and detailed video, I've made a complete table of contents below. That way it's as easy as possible for you to skip around and go ahead if you need to, or to revisit a section if you need to as well. Alright, so let's find out what's actually in here. First thing I'm going to do here is open this up. It's a promising sign right there. Looks like we do have a Hero 12 Black in here. Unless, of course, the box is empty, and then that would also be awkward. So this is what the box looks like on the outside. And as is typical with GoPro boxes, there's going to be this little strip on the bottom that you pull to open it up. So we're going to get it open here. And we're going to slide the contents out on the bottom here. So all the contents come in this little tray here, and it flips open. It's got a lift up lid. And the first thing you're going to see here is it's going to say your camera must be updated before you can use it. So it's going to prompt you to install the Quick app on your phone. And I'm going to go through that as part of the setup process. We'll get to that in a little bit. And also subscribe to GoPro for the best experience. And it's got the QR code right there. And there are also some nice instructions here that show you how to plug in the camera, how to power it on, and looks like it shows the helmet mount on the back and how to use the thumb screw. We'll get into that as well. And some nice GoPro stickers here if you want GoPro stickers to stick on your car, your desk, your laptop, anything like that. Stickers are included. And then some good tips for cold weather performance. So the Hero 12 Black does come with the Enduro battery. And I've got a bunch of Enduro batteries already from prior GoPros, but if you're upgrading to the Hero 12 from the Hero 10, 11, the battery will be the same. It'll work in here. And if you have the Enduro batteries already, this comes with an Enduro battery, and I believe it's the same milliamp hours, even though the Hero 12 is supposed to get a lot better battery life. All right, and then, so what we have in here is we have, first of all, the thumb screw right here. We have a USB to USB-C cable. So it's nice that GoPro includes the USB-A to USB-C, because not everybody has USB-C ports on their computer. So it's good to have that A option as backup. Then there's the adhesive mount, which is the helmet mount right here. It's got that curve on it. And of course, in here is the Enduro battery. So the camera includes one of those. And we've also got the mount here that the thumb screw can go in to mount it to it. And this, of course, will allow you to hook it to several different GoPro accessories in the GoPro ecosystem. This also will work with a lot of third-party accessories if you own those. I own several third-party accessories that aren't necessarily GoPro branded, because there are a lot of great ones out there. And then finally, what we've all been waiting for, the GoPro Hero 12 Black with a bit of stickers and a wrapper on it, and a big notice on the back that your camera must be updated before you can use it. So GoPro really wants you to make sure you understand that, and for good reason, because getting the latest firmware is important, so you have all of the options and any bug fixes. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the wrapper off. And we're going to take this off the lens cover here. And it's worth noting the lens cover on the Hero 12 is the same size as the Hero 11 and the 10. So if you own ND filters like I do, great news is the ND filters for the 10 and the 11 will be compatible with the 12. And this is our front screen right here. And the sticker doesn't want to come off quite as nicely. We're going to have some residue left behind here to clean off. I will clean that off later, not bore you with cleaning it off. So, looking at the GoPro here, it looks overall very similar to the Hero 11 and 10. It looks like it's approximately the same size. Oh, we'll pull this off too, just to clear off the back screen. There, that came off much better. So the back screen looks the same. There were some rumors that it would be an edge-to-edge screen on here. That's not the case. The power button is right here where it says mode. And that button also switches your modes. So if you want to go between video, photo, time-lapse, time warp, those type of modes, that's going to be this button right here. And on the bottom here, this is where you're going to see a difference. So just like the prior GoPro, the feet tuck away here. So you can pull the feet out when you need to use it to hook it to a mount with the thumb screw here. But when you're not using the feet, you can tuck them down and they tuck neatly away. But the neat thing about this GoPro, the Hero 12 for the first time, is GoPro has built the tripod connector in here. So this little connector here enables you to put this on a bunch of different mounts without needing anything else to mount it. So I really like that. Let me give you an example here. If we wanted to put this on this Ulanzi Octopus tripod on the threaded screw here, all we have to do is just tighten it on, and it's going to mount now. Going around to the other side of the camera, this is where the door is. So when you open the door here, this is where the battery goes, right down in here, which I will put that in. This one that came with it may not have a lot of charge. If it doesn't, I have my charged up one, so we have plenty of charge to go through all the menus and everything else. And then this right here is the microSD card slot. So I'm going to put in a microSD card. And by the way, it is important to get a good quality microSD card from a reputable retailer. So in my case, I like to use the SanDisk Extreme, and I use the 512 gigabyte card, and I make sure that it's a U3 A2 card. And the reason for that is you need to make sure your microSD card can keep up with the read and write speeds on your GoPro. If you have too slow of a card, it can cause overheating, and also it can cause your GoPro to lock up. It also can result in lost footage, so you definitely don't want that. So do use a high quality microSD card. And to put in the microSD card, make sure the text on the card faces toward the battery, and then you're just gonna click it into place. You're gonna hear a nice little click, and the card is gonna be flush with the top of the battery. And this right here is where you connect the USB-C cable. So this will be if you want to charge the camera, or if you want to copy data off by plugging into your computer. That's how you would do it right here with USB-C. And then this door closes and it clicks into place. So you just want to make sure it's not still open, because the camera would not be waterproof if it is left open. And right here are some of the microphones on the camera. These would be the front mics. And then there's I believe this is a mic on top here as well. And this right here is the record button. So whenever you want to hit record or take a photo, start a time lapse, start a video, right there is going to be where you hit that. And looking at the outside of the GoPro, there are these blue dots on here. So there's a little bit of a design change on the outside of it. They're not super pronounced, they kind of blend in, but if you're in bright lighting, they're going to show a little bit more. So if you happen to have your Hero 11 and your Hero 12 next to each other, you can see that difference there on the outside. And of course, on the side here, one says 11 black and one says 12 black. Thickness of these overall looks identical. I don't think there's really any changes in thickness there. Looking at them next to each other here, they look the same. You can see the upgrade on the bottom there with the feet. Great to see. And of course, I use the USB pass-through door. And this door, if you own it already, it's compatible with the 12. You can easily pop it on, which I'm going to do right now. To pop off the door, you just open it and tug, and it pops right off. And I'm going to pop it off here. Yep, same design. So you just want to make sure this lines up with that metal rod right there. And it'll pop into place. There we go. And the reason I use this pass-through door is there are a lot of situations where I want to power my GoPro externally with a external battery, like for a time lapse or a night lapse. And also if I'm using the Volta right here, the Volta has the cable right here where I want to plug it in. And the Volta I like because it's equivalent to about 4 GoPro batteries, about 4 of these Enduro with the charge amount. So I can go many, many hours with the Volta, and I don't have to bring along a stack of batteries if I don't want to. Sometimes a stack of batteries is better than the Volta. Other times the Volta is better than the stack of batteries. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to power on the Hero 12 Black, and we're going to get the firmware upgraded. So we're going to power it on right here, and let's see how much battery life we have. It's going to show the GoPro logo there. And I'm going to select English for the language. Legal stuff, I'm going to agree. Voice control, you can use voice commands to operate some functions on the GoPro. I'm going to select off for that. I personally don't use it, but if you want to, you can easily do that. All right, so I've got Quick on my phone here. So I'm gonna bring it up on here. And I'll also do a screen record on my phone so you can see close up what the firmware update process truly looks like here. And if you haven't installed the Quick app before, Quick is spelled Q-U-I-K, and it is GoPro's app. And you will need that app installed in order to connect to your GoPro to do the initial setup and the initial firmware update. We're gonna go over here where it says GoPro, and I'm going to click up here to connect to a new GoPro. And it's going to tell us it found our GoPro. So I'm going to click connect to camera, and it's going to go into pairing mode here. I'm going to click pair, and it's going to beep when it's connected. And sometimes it can sit here at pairing for a little bit. Camera paired. I'm going to be really original, and I'm going to name my camera Hero 12 Black. So I'm going to save the name, and then it's going to save the name, and it's going to finish connecting. It's going to say, let's make sure you're getting all the latest features and improvements. Continue. It's going to prompt to connect to Wi-Fi. So I'm going to click join. All right. And right here, right out of the gate, is that brand new firmware update. It lists a bunch of the features here. So it's really important to install that firmware update. Otherwise, you may not have some of the promised features on the box here. If you tried to use your camera without that firmware, you might be like, where are all these new features? And that would be why. All right, so battery level's too low. We can fix that. What I'm gonna do here is I'm going to power this off, and I'm gonna pop in one of my charged batteries. All right, pop the battery out. Of course, the connection is lost, that's fine. I'm gonna click got it. Got it. All right, it's powered on again now. All right, we're gonna connect again. And so now I'm going to click install update. It's going to get to this screen again, accept and continue. I'm going to connect via Wi-Fi again. All right, so it's going to tell you here, don't go anywhere. You want to keep the app open on your phone, and you want to keep your GoPro powered on. I will say the firmware update process, GoPro has made a lot of improvements. With some of their older GoPros, trying to connect them to the Quick app, I would have to do it time after time over and over, and a lot of the time it wouldn't work. So usually I had to do like a manual firmware upgrade using the microSD card to actually get it to work, but this is much better, and this is actually very fast. Like, we're already at almost 80%, so very impressive. I like to see that getting better and better with each camera, and hopefully that's a trend we'll continue to see. And we're already installing the update. And the camera now says updating, and we have installing the update still on the app on the phone. And this part of the process, I find typically with the first firmware update, it can take about 2 minutes usually, but usually with subsequent firmware updates from GoPro, usually it's a lot faster. All right, that is our first reboot, and it says update complete. All right, and sometimes the app takes a little bit to catch up and acknowledge that the update has completed. So I will give that a moment to finish, and then we're gonna dive into the menus here and get this camera set up. All right, and the app confirmed that it is indeed finished setting up. All right, so I'm gonna close out of the app now, and we're gonna take a look at the camera. So first thing I notice here on the Hero 12 is the menus have a little bit different design. So first things here, a couple things to look at in the main screen, and then we'll get into the general settings. Up here in the upper left is the microSD card, and this 18 hours and 51 minutes is showing how much space would be left on the card if we were to film a video with these default settings right now. When I change the resolution and the frame rate, that's going to update up here accordingly, or if I was taking pictures or a time lapse, it would update accordingly as well. Up here in the top center is the mode we're currently in, so it's video mode. If you drag it that way, it's going to go to time lapse mode, video, and photo mode. Those are the three main modes you can toggle between. And then up here on the right is our battery life percentage, and that also will update depending on what resolution, frame rate, and mode we're in. This 1x here is the slow-mo button. So it's going to select the highest video resolution for chosen slow-mo speed. And what you can do here is you can toggle this. You technically can go all the way up to 8 times in 2.7K 240. But if you're doing slow-mo, I recommend doing 4K 120, which is 4 times. If you put that footage on a 30 frames per second timeline, we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But I'm gonna keep this 1 times for now. Then down here at the bottom is a nice little button to adjust your framing. So you can have widescreen at the bottom. You can have vertical here, which is really neat. This is a simple, easy way to do vertical on here. And you don't have to tilt your camera like this. You can, but you don't have to. And then here at the top is full frame. And full frame is going to be the mode I recommend using a lot of the time. We'll talk about that as well too. But the GoPro Hero 12, just like the Hero 11, has that 8:7 aspect ratio for the full frame. And what that does is that not only uses the entirety of the sensor in here, so you get the most footage quality theoretically, but also you can easily reframe that later on. You can take that 8:7, you can make it vertical using the GoPro Quick app, or another video editor of your choice. So I'm going to put this back to the default widescreen for now. This down here at the bottom is where you can adjust your quality for the video mode. I recommend having highest quality always, because if you have the highest quality, you're going to have all the video resolutions and aspect ratios available to you, and all the frame rates. But if you're in the standard quality, not as many options available, and it's going to not let you use the highest quality out of this, the 5.3K, which I highly recommend. You want to get the most out of this camera that you can. And then basic quality down here is only going to let you use 1080p, which I don't recommend. When this camera can do 5.3K, I recommend getting the best quality out of it possible. And then this button down here to the lower left with the W, that's going to let you set your lens. So the Hero 12 has 5 different lens options on here. The narrowest field of view is going to be the linear plus horizon lock down here. And this is it tells you down here, horizon leveling is used for 5.3K 60, 4K 120, and 2.7K 240, and 1080p 240. But otherwise, you can do horizon lock in the rest of the modes. Then if you scroll up here, you can also do linear. Linear is going to remove that fisheye effect, so if you don't want to have that in your footage, you would want to use linear. The default here, which is in the middle, is wide. And I often like to use wide. I'll talk about that more later as well, as to why I like to use that. But then you can get up here to the real wide mode. So you can get up to super view, which is a 16mm equivalent. And then you can get up to the ridiculously wide hyper view, which is the tallest field of view. And that's really good for that immersive point of view footage, as it mentions here. Hyperview, of course, has a lot of distortion, but when you're doing the POV content, it looks very cool. But for now, I'm going to go back to wide here. And that is an overview of the main screen here and the shortcuts. We're going to swipe down and get into the menu settings. So the menu is quite a bit different on the Hero 12 Black than the Hero 11. First thing you can do is go over here, and that shows your microSD card, and it shows what's uploaded versus not uploaded if you have it connected to the Quick app. because you of course can upload your footage from here. You can set up the auto upload, and you can have your footage automatically upload to the cloud if you are a GoPro subscriber, and you can upload it unlimited amount of footage, and it doesn't reduce the quality either. It keeps it at the quality you filmed it in, so that's really neat. So over here at the center menu, this is the voice control, and the thing to know about these buttons is if they are that bright blue color, that means that feature is turned on, but if they're not lit up with the blue, that means the feature is not turned on. So over here, if we click on it, it's going to say keep current language, yes, and that's going to turn on voice control. I'm going to turn voice control off because I don't use it. And then right here is the beeps. If you don't want any beeps, you can turn them off and there'll be no beeps. If you do want beeps, you can turn them on. And in a little bit, I'm going to show you how to adjust the volume setting. Those beeps are very loud, and I personally do not like them on the default of high. I like my beeps to be a little bit quieter. Right here with the rabbit is quick capture option, and it explains right here what that is. But basically, quick capture is you can push the button right here for record, even if your GoPro is turned off. Quick capture is going to enable you to push that to automatically start filming. And there's settings you can set later on that I'll show you, where you can have it default to a certain mode, or you can have it default to the mode your camera was last in when you powered it off. I usually like to keep that on just in case there's something exciting happening. Sometimes out of habit, it's easier to press the record button than the mode button here on the side. The lock symbol right here, it locks the screen. So locking the screen can be useful if you're going to put your GoPro underwater or something like that, because the water can kind of have fingers of its own and start adjusting your camera or doing weird things with it. So I recommend locking if you want to use it for a use case like that, or if you're concerned about accidentally hitting the screen during a certain activity, you can do that as well. So to unlock it, just click it again and the screen lock is off. This down here affects the front screen options. So you've got a couple different options here. The first one is to have the front screen off. So if you don't want it on at all, that turns it off. If you click this one, this puts it to status only. So it's going to just show basic info there at the front. If you click this one here, it's going to be the actual screen. So it's going to show what's actually on the screen here. And then if you push this one, it's going to be the full screen. I like to do the full screen, and I'll show you what that is after I click the check mark and swipe up. That's what the full screen looks like, and I like to have that. I like to see what's going on, especially if the camera is going to be facing me. So I recommend doing full screen. If you don't do full screen, you can save a little bit of battery life with the other modes, but the amount of battery life saved I think is going to be negligible, so I usually just do the full screen. This option right here is to keep the orientation locked, and I like to have that on because I don't like the orientation to change on my camera if I tilt it. I don't want it going vertical, horizontal, I want it to stay as it is. And then finally, the option down here to set up the max lens. GoPro has released Max Lens Mod 2.0, and there's some really nice improvements in that. I'm not going to get into that today, but I will have a separate video on that where I show you footage and best settings to get the most out of the Max Lens mod. But I am excited. It's got some nice improvements over the original Max Lens. And finally, we'll toggle over here to the right. And on the right-hand part of the menu, you do have the option to pair the device. If you click on that, it's going to search for Bluetooth compatible devices, which it's worth mentioning. The GoPro Hero 12 Black does allow you to use Bluetooth microphones now. But of course, Bluetooth microphone options are kind of limited, but one of the prominent ones you can use with this are AirPods. So you can use your AirPods as a microphone if you want to. And that could be useful in certain loud environments where that might get you a little bit better sound. So that is where you would go to pair those. For controls where it says easy, I recommend clicking on this and changing it. We want to go to Pro because that's going to give us all of the possible options on here. And really, to get the most out of the GoPro Hero 12 Black, you want to have the Pro options so you can customize everything to get the very best. This preferences menu right here, this is going to be where there's a lot of different settings, and I'm going to go down through these with you. So the first one at the top here to set up the auto upload, we kind of already looked at that from the general menu. If If you click there, it's going to prompt you to go to the Quick app and to set up the auto upload there. Under wireless connections, I don't really have to change anything on here. Technically, if you want to save some battery life, you could turn that off when you're not trying to connect to the camera. But I'm going to keep it on. And if you do ever have any problems with the wireless or the camera connecting to your phone, if you go down here to reset connections and reset it, that usually will fix the pairing issues. And under general, the beep volume right here, the default is medium. I'm going to put it to low. I actually thought it was high, so I can't imagine how loud high is. It was connected to medium, but medium was plenty loud, so I'm put it down to low. Quick capture, we already set that to on. We want to keep that on. And the default preset, this is for quick capture. This is going to be what it'll do for you. So if you put to last used, that's going to be whatever the camera was set to before you powered it off. I usually do last used video because if I want to do a quick capture, it's probably going to be a video. It's probably not going to be a photo or a time lapse, but you do have those options as well. For the auto power off time, the default here is 5 minutes. Generally 5 minutes is a good idea. In case your GoPro accidentally gets powered on, it's going to power off automatically after 5 minutes of being idle. That means if you haven't interacted with the screen, if you're not recording, if you're not doing anything like that, it'll power off. But you can change the setting from 1 minute all the way down to never. And for the LEDs, you can change the LED lights. You can do all on, all off, front off only. I usually keep them all on. That way if I have the camera, if I'm behind the camera or facing toward it, the LEDs are always on and I know what's going on with the camera. It's helpful to have that record light especially. And our next menu down here under video. For the bitrate, you definitely want to change this to high. You want to get the high bitrate. That's going to give you the very highest quality out of this camera. And your footage is going to look a lot better. And you're going to have a lot more flexibility with it later on when editing. Bit depth, you definitely want to change this to 10-bit. Just like with the Hero 11, the Hero 12 Black has the 10-bit footage. And to give you an idea why it matters, 8-bit footage has 16 possible color shades, but 10-bit footage has 1 billion possible color shades. So many times more color shades possible than the 8-bit. And the footage looks a lot better. It's noticeable, especially if you're like filming a sky or a sunset or clouds, something like that. Sometimes you can get kind of that splotchy pattern if you're in 8-bit. But when you're in 10-bit, it's that nice fade of colors. You don't have a lot of that weird splotchiness to the footage. And it does note here that this also enables a log profile, which we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And then for the anti-flicker, this is going to depend on where you live. I live in the United States, so I set it to 60 Hertz. In a lot of countries, you would set it to 50. But if you're not sure what your country is, just look it up on Google. It'll tell you for sure. Next, we're going to go to voice control. And this is going to be voice control if you want to have it on. You can turn it on here, and then down here under commands, it's going to show you a lot of the commands you can use with the camera. I do keep it off, so I'm going to leave it off here. For the displays, you're offered some options here. For orientation, you can have landscape or all. I'm going to keep it set to landscape. For the screensaver for the rear, the default is 1 minute. I'm actually going to set this to never because I don't like it if I'm recording a clip that's longer than a minute or even 5 minutes. I don't like it when the back screen goes off. I find it a little bit disconcerting. It makes me think my camera has frozen up or something like that. And then the screensaver front, I'm going to have it match the rear screen, so I'm going to have it not do the screensaver for the front screen either. Brightness, this is a little bit different than with prior GoPros. I think those usually default to 100. So the default on here is 50%, which I think is part of GoPro's push where they've advertised that this Hero 12 Black gets a lot better battery life. But 50% I find a little bit too dim. So I'm going to drag this up. I don't need 100%, but I generally like to be like right around 90 on here. I'm going to leave it at 91. It's kind of tricky toggling it to get it precise. And I find that that's a good brightness. It probably saves a little bit of battery life over 100%. How much does it save? Probably not a lot, but 50% I find to be a little bit too dim to see those details on an already fairly small screen. Rear screen grid, I like to turn this on. That's going to display the 3x3 grid across the rear screen, and I like to use that when I'm trying to frame something. And down here, there's the language settings, so you can adjust your language there to your language preference. Date and time, that's going to set automatically with the app, so usually I find I don't need to change that. You can adjust the daylight savings time here, and your time, I believe you can do like 24 hours, which I like the 24-hour timing, so I'm going to set it to that. And here's your mods mode, so if you have the max lens mod, this is where you would click to turn that on and enable it. If you don't have the max lens mod on your camera, you want to leave this to none. And then media mod, it will automatically detect it. So if you own the media mod, that is compatible with the Hero 12. And you just have to take off the door to install the media mod. But if you've used it before, you know how that goes. Down here is some of the about info. So if you go under GoPro updates, it's going to prompt you to connect to the Quick app. Camera info here is going to show the camera name. And then here's your serial number and your firmware version number. So the serial number, if you ever need to do a warranty claim with GoPro or need GoPro support, they're going to ask you for your serial number. You can find it there. You also can find it down in the battery bay underneath the battery, but it's really tiny font and very difficult to read down in there. So I guess that's a good backup if something's wrong with your GoPro, if it's broken and won't power on. You can get it down there in the battery door. I usually shine a light down in there to read it if I have to. And then for the version number, if you ever want to check your firmware version, it's going to be right here. And the battery info is kind of neat. So it tells you your battery health here, which is excellent. And then battery type compatible. If you do use third-party batteries, do take note that they're not always fully compatible. And sometimes they're going to cause freeze-ups with the GoPro. I've seen that before when I've tested out some. But there are other third-party batteries that have worked fine. So I find they can be hit or miss, but this is helpful to check just in case you suspect the battery could be causing a problem. This might provide some useful info. And then under the regulatory here, this just shows the regulatory info if you want to look at that and read about it. Thrilling stuff. And then down here is the reset. So yes, here is where you can format your SD card, which if you want to format it, I recommend doing it from here. It's going to be fast and easy. And like I mentioned before, this does delete data on your microSD card. So make sure any data on there is copied before you format it. And then if you want to reset any of your presets here, you can do that right there. If you want to reset the camera tips and have those pop up again. And then finally, if you ever need to do a factory reset on your camera, this is where you would do that, and you would click reset, and it's going to reset your camera to what it would be when you first pulled it out of the package. So I don't recommend doing that unless you're having a lot of bugginess with your camera, and then you might want to do that. And that is it for the general settings menu. So I'm going to toggle back up here, and now we can get into the real exciting stuff.
I like the Hero 12 because you can change lots of settings on it.
I'm going to show you the very best settings that I recommend to get the best possible video, photo, time-lapse, night-lapse, and time warp footage from this camera. And I've used a lot of GoPros over the years, and a lot of those settings are pretty consistent across GoPro models, but there are a few new things on here that I want to show you to make sure you're aware of so that you get the very best possible footage from your GoPro Hero 12 Black. Alright, so I'm going to start off with the video settings because video is probably the primary use case that you're going to use your action camera for most of the time. It is what I use mine for most of the time. So to set your video settings, down here where it says video, if you click on that, it's going to come up with a default preset up here, but then you're going to have options to create other presets. You can create a bunch of different custom settings here, and you can save presets for different use cases. And typically there are 3 or 4 presets that I set up. So I'm going to go through those today and explain what I set them up for. And that might give you some ideas of how you may want to set up your GoPro as well. And when I click on that, it's going to bring up a whole bunch of different settings. And the menu on the Hero 12 does look a lot different than some of the prior GoPros. And one of the things the Hero 12 offers is the new HDR mode, which is that high dynamic range. So if you want to film in HDR, you would just select HDR there. Standard is going to be that default color profile. And then log is going to be if you want to film in that flat looking footage that you can easily grade later on. So really it's going to be up to you. If you want to grade the footage later on, I recommend selecting log. If you just want the standard, normal color profile, then you want to select standard right there. For the aspect ratio for this mode, I'm going to set it up with the 8x7. And this is going to be that mode where later on, I want to reframe the footage and I want to have maximum flexibility for that. So the 8x7 footage here can be dropped onto a 16:9 timeline. And you can set it to that aspect ratio, and then you have the option to vertically adjust it. There's going to be extra footage there, and it's really nice to have that flexibility. You also can add motion to your scenes later on, which is nice. If you do want to do something like for Instagram or YouTube short, that 9:16 right there is a great option. You can also do 4:3. I don't really recommend 4:3 though, because you're really not going to get the benefit of the full sensor. So I just like to do 8x7 instead of 4:3, because 8x7 has all the benefits of 4:3 and more. And then for resolution, I'm going to select 5.3K, 10-bit right there. And of course, it is worth noting when you're using the 8x7 aspect ratio, you can only go up to as high as 30 frames per second. So typically what I do for this mode is I keep it at 5.3K 24, because when I do all of my final exports, I export them in 24 frames per second. But if you export them in 30, then it's a good idea to keep it set to 30 there. For the lens, you can only use wide in the 8x7, so you can't change that at all. You have to record in wide. Later on when you're editing, you can remove the distortion if you want to there. And then here we have a simple hypersmooth on or off. I recommend keeping hypersmooth on. That's going to give you the best results. There'd be a couple scenarios where you wouldn't want to, but that's going to be like if you're using ND filters and you're getting that cinematic motion blur with the 180-degree shutter angle. That's when you'd want hypersmooth off, because it won't work properly with those slower shutter speeds. I'm not going to get into all of that today, but I do have a video that talks about ND filters and GoPros. I've linked to it above if you want to check it out. All of those same principles will apply with the Hero 12 Black. Under capture, if we click here, this is where you can change like your scheduled capture options, your duration limit, your hindsight. Hindsight is where the camera is kind of always recording in a way, but it's not. Basically, hindsight is useful if you're doing fishing or if you're watching a sports game and you want to really capture that highlight, but you don't want to have your GoPro recording all the time. If you set your hindsight, and let's say you set it to 15 seconds or 30, what happens is you tap the record button after the moment you want to capture happens, and your GoPro is going to automatically go back to what was happening 30 seconds ago, and it's going to record it. Same thing with 15. So if you're going to use hindsight, I recommend using 30 seconds. But do note that if you're using hindsight, it is going to go through your battery quite a bit quicker. Timer, I'm going to keep that off. And zoom, I don't recommend zooming on here. It's going to be digital zoom, and it's going to reduce the quality of your footage. So if you want to crop it or zoom, do it while editing. You'll get a lot better results. Under the Pro Tune settings, this is where we can customize a lot of different options here. In general, I recommend just keeping the auto shutter. Your GoPro is going to adjust shutter speed automatically, again, unless you're using ND filters. For EV comp, I recommend keeping this down here at -0.5. In general, action cameras with smaller sensors, they can tend to blow out the highlights a little bit. And I find if you keep it at -0.5, later on when you're editing, you can bring it up to 0, and it's gonna bring out and preserve a lot of that detail in the brighter parts of your footage, versus if you have it set at 0. So I recommend -0.5. White balance, I like to set this to a static value. If you are going to edit your footage later on, I recommend just doing native. That's going to give you the most flexibility there. But if you're not going to edit later on and you're outside in the daylight, middle of the day, I recommend 5000K. If it's sunrise or sunset, I recommend 6500K. And if it's like nighttime that you're filming, I recommend about 3200 to 4000K. For the ISO min, I recommend setting that to 100. And the ISO max, you have a couple options here. Generally, I recommend either 800 or 1600. Technically, it goes all the way up to 6400, but I don't recommend going anywhere above 1600. If you do, you're going to get really noisy, grainy footage, and it's going to look really bad. So I recommend setting it to 1600 max, and that's going to allow your camera to adjust the ISO. It's going to be able to boost that ISO briefly to give you a little bit brighter footage without completely destroying it with noise and grain. For sharpness, I recommend setting this to low. You can always add a little bit of sharpness later on, but you can't take sharpness away. And too much sharpness, especially if you're like in the woods with a lot of trees and leaves, it's going to make the footage not look as good. And so we had the profiles at the top that we could adjust, but down here at the bottom under ProTune, we also have the color settings. So if you're in the standard profile, you can adjust the colors further. That profile at the top is kind of separate from the colors. This is kind of more fine tuning on the colors. So if you are going to grade the footage later on, and you want complete control over those colors, set flat here. If you want the natural color, where it's not really overly saturated and not flat, it should look true to life, you want to set natural. Then if you want that really vibrant, oversaturated look, go with vibrant. For the raw audio option, this records some raw audio tracks with various levels of processing. If you want really good audio, I don't necessarily recommend the mic from the GoPro. I recommend using something like the DJI wireless mic here. You have a couple different options with the wireless mic. If you have the media mod, you can hook up the DJI wireless mic. If not, you can wear one of the mics and record to the mic. It does have some built-in storage. And then you can sync your audio later on with the clip from your camera. That's what I would do. It's just a little bit easier and lower hassle. And that way, if for some reason the mic became disconnected from the media mod, you're not going to lose all of your external audio. You'll have that backup track on your microphone. If you are in a really windy environment and you don't have an external mic, I recommend keeping the wind reduction to auto. And then our final section down here is the shortcuts. This allows you to customize the shortcuts on your main screen there. I usually just keep these the defaults. I think these work really well, but you do have one available one here, the upper left, where there's not one right now, it's off. You can add something here if you want to. So there's a bunch of different options. Really just pick what works best for you. And if I was to add one, I think I would probably add shutter. So I'm gonna add shutter there. So those are the main settings there for that main mode that I would use probably any of the time where I don't want to slow anything down, where I just want it to be the normal default speed. I like to do that because I like to use the full sensor. And again, that gives me maximum flexibility later on when editing. If you don't want to edit at all, and you just want a simple 16:9 clip that you can take out of the camera, I recommend doing one change here. I recommend doing 16:9. If you do that, that clip's gonna be ready to come right out of the camera and for you to share or you to do a quick edit on, and you won't have to do any vertical, horizontal adjusting. And if you do 16:9 here, you will see additional frame rates. You can go all the way up to 5.3K 60 with 16:9. And the nice thing about the GoPro is it grays out different options that are available. So like if you select different aspect ratios, it will show you the resolutions and frame rates that are available. But if you were to do the 16:9, I still recommend doing it in the 5.3K to get the very highest results. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna create a new preset. So I'm gonna click on that and I'm going to click video. And then right here, we're gonna key in all our settings again. So this one is gonna be the one if I want to film in 5.3K 60. So I'm gonna set it to 16:9 and I'm gonna go over here and do 5.3K and I'm gonna click 60. And basically the slow motion you can get from this, if you put it on a 30 frames per second timeline, you can do 50% slower. So you can do half the speed of what something's happening at, which is nice slow motion. And if you put it onto a 24 frames per second timeline, you can put it down to 40% of the original speed. So a little bit slower than the 30 frames per second timeline. And since I usually use a 24, the 5.3K 60 really gives me a lot of flexibility. For the lens for this, I'm going to keep it set to wide. Hypersmooth I'm going to keep on, but if you're doing a lot of fast-paced action, you may want to put it to auto boost. And what the GoPro will do is it'll automatically stabilize it further, and it'll crop a little bit if your camera's really shaking a lot. It'll kick in that auto boost automatically though, it'll detect it, and it's very useful. But I usually find that hypersmooth on is good enough, especially when I'm slowing down footage, because slowing it down can already have that stabilizing effect on the footage. So capture, I'm going to leave that alone. ProTune, we're going to plug in our similar settings here. I'm going to do the -0.5 for the EV comp. White balance, I'm going to do 5000K. ISO min 100, ISO max 1600, sharpness low. Color natural, and I'm going to leave the audio off for the raw. And wind reduction, I'm going to turn that off. And then I'm going to click the check mark here, and it's going to go to the final part, which is where we can put in the name of it. So if you have a certain activity that you're going to use those settings for, they've got a pre-configured list here already. And this one I'm going to call Epic. So I'm going to click Epic there, and then it's going to show in my menu as Epic. Now, I saved it as custom thinking that clicking custom might let me input some type of naming, like with letters, but it didn't. So custom, I'm going to go back and change those settings now, and I'm going to make that my 420 slow-mo mode. So the nice thing is when you've set these, you can always go back and tweak them later on. So I'm going to click here to the right of that middle one, and I'm going to set this to 4K, and I'm going to set it to 120. I like to keep the lens wide on that. Hypersmooth, I'm going to keep it set to on. Especially with 4K 120, if you put that footage on a 30 frames per second timeline, you can slow it down by 4 times. And if you put it on a 24 frames per second timeline, you can slow it down by 5 times. So on a 24 frames per second timeline, you can make that 20% of the initial speed for some really cool slow motion. Under ProTune, I don't need to change anything here because those settings are still there from when we set this one up before. And that's going to update. We can confirm here. It did save all of our settings. So we have a 5.3K 60, which is the mode I'm probably going to use a lot of the time when I might possibly want to slow down some or all of that scene later on, but I don't need like the super slow motion. So that Epic mode is probably going to be the one I'm going to use most of the time. But again, if I for sure want an actual speed, or it's one where I'm talking to the camera, I'd probably do the 5.3K 8x7 24 for the maximum reframing options. And then when I want the really super slow motion, I'm going to use that custom mode right there. And I'm going to set up one more preset here. And this is going to be my mode where it's log, where I want to do grading later on with it. And for log, I want to do 16:9 with that, because I want to do 5.3K 60 with log. And 8x7, of course, is going to limit me to 5.3K 30. I'm going to keep it wide for the lens and hypersmooth on. Under ProTune, you can't adjust EV comp and log. It is grayed out. Log has its own exposure value settings that you can change easily later on when grading. And for white balance, for that, I recommend setting native. It's going to give you the most gradable footage. For the ISO min, I recommend 100. And the ISO max for log, you can only go up to 400. So that is important to note. Shutter, I keep that set to auto, by the way. Sharpness, definitely keep that set to low for log. For the color, that of course is going to be grayed out as well. For the wind option, I'm going to turn that off. Even though if I'm filming log and grading the footage later on, why would I not use something that's going to get me better audio? So that would not apply there. And shortcuts down here would not apply. I'm going to click the check mark. And for this one, I'm going to select something here that'll indicate to me that it's log. So I'm going to select outdoor right there. That's going to be my log mode. So those are the 4 basic modes that I set up. You may have different preferences that you want to set up for your use cases, but those are the 4 general ones that I like to set up. And again, you can change them at any time, customize them further as your needs change. So now that we've set up the video modes, let's hit the mode button here and go over to the photo mode. So I'm going to click down here, and there's a bunch of already pre-configured presets here for photos. And generally, I usually save like a max of one other preset, but generally I work with the ones that are already here on the GoPros in the past. So for photo up here, I usually like to stick with wide because wide is going to use the whole sensor for the photo. And again, I can edit the photo later on, and I can do lens correction if I need to. For the capture for the output, you've got a couple options here. There's super photo, which is where GoPro is going to select the best imaging processing for your shot. You also have HDR, and that's a great option if you have a high contrast scene without much motion. It can work well for that. Standard output, I don't really recommend. That's just the plain old JPEG file. It's a small file, but it doesn't really get the most out of this camera when you do that. My favorite mode is this one right here, and that is the raw output. That gives me maximum flexibility later on when editing the photo. So really I consider 2 good options here. Raw is great if you want to edit the photo later on. If you don't want to, go with super photo. The GoPro does a great job of automatically selecting the best image processing for that photo. So I recommend that if you just want a photo right out of your GoPro that you can share on social media. But I'm going to stick with raw because I really like editing photos later on. Now, something new with the Hero 12 is there's an interval mode for photo. So in the past, if you wanted to do interval, you had to use like a time-lapse mode, which you could do with photos where it would take a picture every certain amount of seconds. But on this, you can do the interval now. And what you can do is you can put 3 seconds for the interval, and you can go all the way up to 120 seconds, 2 minutes apart. So it's up to you how often you want it to take it. But the nice thing is it's going to keep taking a photo at that interval until you tell it to stop, or until the battery runs out. Generally, I'm going to keep that off unless I have the want for interval often, and then I would probably save a preset for it, but by default, I'm going to keep that set to off. The timer is useful if you want to set up your GoPro on a tripod and you want to get back with a group and take a photo. You also, of course, can take a photo through the Quick app as well, but you can have a delay all the way up to 10 seconds on there, and then you can have a 3-second delay. I'm going to put this to off because generally if I'm holding the camera, I just want to take the photo right away and not have a timer there. Pro Tune settings, you can adjust a lot of things here. The shutter, I generally recommend keeping that set to auto, but you can adjust the shutter speeds here, which is very useful if you really want to fine tune those photo settings. EV comp, I do recommend -0.5. I think that's going to give you the best results, again, without overblowing the highlights. This is especially good if you're getting a photograph like of the sky and there's a lot of clouds in it. This is going to get you a lot of that cloud detail in the brighter clouds. You're going to have that in your photo. White balance, I generally keep that at auto for photos. The camera does a great job of selecting the white balance automatically, so I'm going to keep that at auto. ISO min, keep it at 100. ISO max for photos, I recommend going to 800, unless you're in a low light environment, but then you're kind of hit or miss if you're going to get good results above 800. Usually I find 1600 is going to still be too noisy, but there are some good products out there where you can denoise the footage later on. Lightroom will let you do that. Luminar Neo will let you do that. I've used that before and gotten good results, so there are some options there. I still recommend not going higher than 800 for the ISO max. And then sharpness, I recommend keeping that low. You can always sharpen the photo more. And for color, if you are going to edit it later on, put it to flat. If you're not going to, I recommend natural for best results. And those are the default photo settings I recommend. Again, I'm going to edit it, so I'm keeping it at raw. If you're not going to, go for super photo. Burst is a mode where you can basically hit the record button and it's going to take a bunch of photos in a certain amount of time. So for the output of that, I recommend doing raw if you're going to edit. If you're not going to edit, do standard. But RAW, the advantage is you get both the JPEG and the GPR. So if you change your mind and want to edit later on, you don't lose anything. It'll take up a little more space, of course, but if you have a plenty large microSD card, that's not an issue. For the burst rate, there's a lot of customization you can do here. You can have 3 in 1 second, 5 in 1 second. You can go all the way up to 60 in 10 seconds. So generally, if I'm going to do a burst, I'm going to go kind of near the middle here. I like to do 10 in 3 seconds or 30 in 6 seconds. This can be useful if you want to make sure, like a group of people, that their eyes are all open in the photos. If you want to have a lot of options to pick from, that can be great. You kind of have to figure out what's the happy balance for you. And then ProTune, I recommend same settings here. So I'm going to toggle those in. For best results. And then finally, there is a new night photo mode on the Hero 12, which is great. So with the night photo mode, again, I recommend keeping wide there for the lens. And then for the other settings down here, for the output, I recommend doing RAW, because especially in low lighting, you want to have that maximum flexibility for editing later on and really bringing out the details that you want brought out. For the shutter speed, you of course can adjust accordingly. So if you're doing like a night photo of the sky, you can adjust this all the way up to 30 seconds. 30 seconds is going to be for those really nice dark skies where you want to look up and take a picture of the stars. But of course, you don't want to be holding the GoPro with this mode. You would want it to be mounted on a tripod, and you would not want the GoPro to move at all, because otherwise your photo is going to be all blurry and it's not going to look good. You don't want there to be any motion for the duration of the time the shutter's open. So you could put it on something like the Volta here. You could put it on a tripod. Basically for this one, I recommend using the quick app on your phone to initiate the shutter. Otherwise, there's going to be shake in the camera and it's going to mess up your photo. You can let the GoPro select the proper shutter speed. That's generally going to work well for night photo. But if you want to experiment and customize it further, you can do that. And of course, what I just talked about, there is a timer here. You can push the button here to take the photo. And then you can have the timer here to kind of accommodate the camera for the shake to end before it starts capturing the photo. So if you're going to do that, which is not a bad idea, I would recommend putting this to 10 seconds. Then you push this and you have your hands off the GoPro. It gives it 10 seconds to stop shaking if it is, before it starts taking the photo. And again, that's really important when you have the shutter open wide. You don't want any motion. For night photos, I leave the EV comp alone and the white balance. For the ISO min and max, I generally would recommend keeping those set the way they are, 100 to 800. Anything over 800, even with a night photo, it's going to get really grainy and noisy. Sharpness though, I recommend setting that to low. And color, I recommend keeping that at natural. And those are the settings I recommend for night photo. Finally, let's go to the third menu here, which is for time lapse. So it defaults here to time warp. When you click on it though, you're going to see time warp, star trails, light painting, vehicle lights, time lapse, and night lapse. There's a lot of different modes you can customize here. And that is one of the great things about the GoPro. They have a lot of these really cool modes under the time lapse. The star trails, that's been one of my favorites. I love the star trails one. Prior to the Hero 11 Black, you could not get star trails in camera. You had to do it later on with a lot of steps, and being able to do it right in the camera is really cool, and it really enables a lot of people to easily get star trails and share them, and I love a good star trail. But first thing we're going to set here is the time warp mode, so I'm going to click over here, and for the time warp mode, this is going to depend. Do you want to do any framing with it later on, or do you just want it simple 16:9 right out of the camera? I generally do 16:9 for the time warp because I'm not really going to reframe it later on. But if you want that flexibility, do the 8:7 and you'll have it later on. Resolution, I'm going to do 5.3K. I like to keep the lens wide for that. The exception is if I'm in an urban area and I'm doing a time warp with a lot of buildings. I don't want wide because I don't want the buildings to have that bowing effect to them. I want them to be straight. So I want the lines to be straight, and that's when I would do linear for the lens if I'm in that situation, but otherwise I keep it wide. Speed, I like to keep that set to auto. The GoPro does a good job automatically doing the time warp speed, but if you do want to really customize it, you can do a set speed here. It's going to stick to that set speed. So 2 times is going to speed up your video by 2 times the actual speed. And then 30 times is going to speed it up by 30 times. And it is going to stabilize in accordance with that as well. And the nice thing is the tips give you the estimate here of how much you would have to record to get how much of a time warp at the end. So I'm going to keep it set to auto. Scheduled capture, I'm going to keep that off. Duration, no limit. Timer off. Zoom, keep it at 1. Pro Tune settings are going to be very similar to video here. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. I'm going to set EV comp to negative 0.5. White balance, I'm going to set that to 5000K. ISO min 100. ISO max 1600. Sharpness, we're going to set that to low. Color, I'm going to keep it natural. Wind, I'm going to keep that to auto. Usually I'm not going to get sound from my time warp, but I'm going to keep it set to auto just in case. And shortcuts, I'm going to leave those alone. Next, we're going to look at star trails here. And star trails, the nice thing with the Hero 12 Black is you can now use the full sensor readout with star trails, the 8x7. So that's probably going to get even better results than the 16x9. The 16x9 would have kind of auto cropped it inside the camera. So it's nice to really have that almost square picture of the sky, because then you can really reframe it later on. You can also add the panning in your time lapses too, which I love being able to do that. And we're going to do 5.3K here. I want to get the max resolution out of the camera. We of course can only do lens of wide when we're doing the 8x7. Trail length here, you have a couple options. You can do the short, you can do the long, or you can do the max. And it lets you view examples, which I love it that they have the examples on here because you know exactly what it means. So that's what the max is going to look like. This is what the long is going to look like. So the long is going to have those nice comet looking star trails. And then the short is going to look like this right here. They're going to be much shorter. Generally for star trails, I like to either do long or max. It really depends on what you're going for, but I recommend long or max. I usually keep long as kind of that happy medium, and that means it doesn't fill in the entirety of the duration. Eventually the trail comes to an end and it starts a new one with a different star, which is cool. So really it's a matter of preference, but I will tell you, I love the results this mode gets on this camera. Shutter speed does default to 30 seconds. Again, 30 seconds is good if you've got like a really dark sky, no moon, not a lot of urban light pollution. If you do have a moon or the light pollution, you'd want to go lower. But at the same time, I don't really recommend star trails with a moon anyway, because the moon kind of ruins the star trail. It just does not look good in there, so I don't recommend the moon in there. And the timer of 3 seconds, I recommend keeping that set. That way after you hit the record button here to start it going, gives your camera time to stop shaking. And of course, a quick note, when you're doing time lapses or night lapses or star trails, I recommend having a power bank. I use one of these from Anchor here, and it works really well. On a full charge, you usually can have your camera set up for the entirety of the night. I'll link to the ones I use in the description below, but I definitely recommend a power bank as an accessory for a GoPro. It's going to help ensure your camera doesn't cut off in the middle of a time lapse or a night lapse, because that's frustrating. Sometimes it cuts off the best part, and you don't want your battery to run out. A lot of settings down here at the bottom, they will not be adjustable for star trails. GoPro does a really good job of keying in good settings here anyway, and I recommend keeping the ISO min and max at 800. I would just leave those, and the rest of the settings here are grayed out anyway, and we can't change them. Let's go to the next mode. For light painting, this is also a very cool mode. I recommend using 8x7, that way you can reframe it later on. In case maybe you didn't stand where exactly you wanted to, you can recrop it and fit it exactly as you want it to be. And I recommend doing 5.3K. The lens default will be wide. For the trail length, it's going to depend. Again, there's examples here. That's going to be the max. This is going to be the long, and this is going to be the short. Kind of like with Star Trails, I recommend having max or long. Usually I will stick with max because like if I'm trying to write something or draw something, I don't want to lose any of it. I want to have it all there. But there could be situations where long might make sense for your use case, so adjust accordingly. A lot of these defaults I'm just going to leave here. That shutter is a good one. You don't want it open too long or your video could be washed out, but you also don't want the shutter too short. There needs to be that little bit of slower shutter speed to kind of have that effect that you're going for. So I'm going to keep that at the default of 0.5 seconds. The rest of these I'm not going to change here. And the Pro Tune settings, those are pretty much set in stone as well. I recommend sticking with those. The ISO min and max at 100 is also a great idea because that's going to make your background really dark, and whatever light painting you're doing in there is going to pop. It's going to really stand out. Even if you're in like some type of suburban or urban area at nighttime with other lights, your light painting is still going to stand out nicely with the ISO min and max set to 100. All right, let's go on to the next mode here. And it's going to be vehicle lights. Vehicle lights is a neat feature. Again, you can do 8x7 with that as well. And I recommend 5.3K wide. Trail length, let's look at some examples again. That's going to be short. That's going to be long. And that's going to be max. So with the trail length for these, I usually recommend long. I feel like max is a little bit too much, and it can sometimes get very overexposed looking and washed out. But short, I think, is often too short, so I like long for this. Again, personal preference. You can adjust it as you want to, but I personally recommend long. For the shutter speed, I recommend just keeping that as it is. You may have to customize it if you're in a brighter place, but again, you want to use this at nighttime. This isn't meant for the daytime. But generally, 2 seconds is going to be what you want for most situations. Again, under the Pro Tune settings, I recommend leaving these. GoPro does a really good job of putting in the best settings for these night modes, so I recommend just leaving those as they are. But if you did find yourself in a really bright setting, in addition to adjusting the shutter speed, you also could adjust the ISO lower. You can experiment a little bit with it. Initially, you may have to go down like to ISO min and max at 400 to get good results there. That would be if you're in a pretty bright urban area getting those lights. And let's take a look at that time-lapse mode. So this one is purely preference. If you want to do a time-lapse inside the GoPro and have it all stitched together and ready to export and share, do video mode. You won't have the individual photos to work with. You're just going to have a single .mp4 video file. But if you do want to edit them later on, then of course you'd want to use the photo mode. And the nice thing about the video mode is you do have the 8x7 with this as well. So say you wanted to do a video, but maybe you'd like to be able to do some reframing later on or add some motion there, I recommend 8x7. If you don't want to do any of that reframing or adding motion later on, then do 16:9. And I definitely recommend sticking with the highest resolution. For the lens, you do have a couple options. I recommend wide. I think it's great to get the best possible widest angle with that. You can always adjust it later on as well. Interval here, I generally recommend a 2-second to 5-second interval if you're doing like a daytime time lapse. This partly depends on how long you're doing it. But if you're doing a sunset, I recommend about 2 to 3 seconds. If you're doing a long, like all-day time lapse, I would probably recommend 5 seconds or maybe even 10 seconds. But you can go all the way up to 60 minutes. You can have it do every 1 hour. It takes 1 frame. That can be useful at like a long duration construction site or something like that. If you want to capture a time lapse day after day after day to show progression over several weeks or months. I'm going to keep this one set to 3 seconds. And I like to keep duration at no limit. Again, I'm going to be using my power bank, and that's going to keep the battery from running out on me. Pro Tune settings, I recommend EV comp -0.5. White balance, I recommend setting that to static value. If you are doing a sunset, go for 6500. Sunrise would be the same. If it's middle of the day, I would recommend 5000K. For the ISO values, I recommend keeping those at a static value. Generally, if it's a bright day, I recommend doing ISO 100 for min and max. That way the ISO is not changing on you, and that's going to help prevent more sources of flicker in your time lapse. Sharpness, I recommend low. Color, I recommend natural if you don't want to do any editing later on, which you're probably not going to want to with a video file. And you are limited with the amount of editing you can do with the video time lapse, so keep that in mind. So with the color profile, I would keep that set to natural. And I'm going to save this as a separate preset, and I'm going to save this as outdoor. And to me, that's going to represent my video time-lapse setting. Up here at the top, I'm going to know that's what that means. Because what I want to do is I want to go back and I want to set the photo options as well. So for the photo, when I select that, I'm going to keep the lens of wide, so it's using the entire sensor and not doing any crop. For the output, I would set that to RAW, because that's the point of doing that, is to be able to edit later on. For the interval, I would keep that at 3 seconds. I'm not going to set scheduled capture duration. I'm going to keep those set to off and no limit. Under the Pro Tune, I'm going to set the EV comp to -0.5. White balance, I'm going to set that to a static value, but I'm going to do native. The ISO min and max, I'm going to set those both to 100. Sharpness low, and color flat. And then finally, night lapse down here, which is one of my favorite modes. This is going to be a little bit different from Star Trails in that the night lapse is going to be if you want to get a certain image every certain amount of seconds. So it's going to be a night lapse without the trails in it, essentially. You're going to see the stars progressing, rotating throughout the sky, but there's not going to be the trail showing the progression of the star. For night lapse, I really can't recommend the video mode. You can try it, and it does okay on here, but to get the very best results, I do recommend the photo mode. But if you do want to do the video mode, do video and do 8x7. It's going to give you a lot of reframing and motion later on that you can do. Do 5.3K and wide, and you're going to get the broadest view of the sky. For the interval, I recommend keeping it set to auto, and that's because we're going to have our shutter speed control the interval. And if it's a really dark night sky, I'm going to set that to 30 seconds. I'm going to have the shutter stay open as long as it can. And what this is going to do is it's going to take 1 frame every 30 seconds. The interval can be left at auto because it's going to automatically start the cycle over again for the next frame once the shutter cycle completes at 30 seconds. I like to leave scheduled capture off, duration no limit. Timer 3 seconds is a good idea. That gives the camera time to stop shaking after you hit the record button. Pro Tune settings, EV comp is going to be grayed out. For night balance for a night lapse, I recommend doing anywhere from 2800 to about 4000K. 3200 is kind of my happy medium there. I find that gives me the best results, but 4000K is kind of secondary. I like that one as well. For ISO min and max, I recommend 800 for the min and 800 for the max. And that's going to apply whether there's a moon in the sky or not. But if you are close to an urban area and you're trying to get, like, say, a night lapse of a city skyline and not the stars, you may want to bump the ISO min and max down to about 400. And at the same time, you would readjust the shutter speed. You'd have to play around with it a little bit depending on your lighting, but you'd probably have that more like down near 5 seconds. But if you're doing stars, you're probably going to be the 20 to 30 second ballpark, maybe 15 seconds if there's a full moon in the sky. But do note, if you have a full moon in the sky, you're not really going to get a lot of stars because the moon is going to kind of drown those out with its brightness. Recommend setting sharpness to low, and color, I recommend keeping that at natural. So that would be if you want the video mode with night lapse. If you want the photo mode, when you select photo, you're going to have a couple lens options. I recommend doing wide. For the output, I definitely recommend RAW. It's going to give you that full editing flexibility to really get some cool results. Interval, I recommend keeping that set to auto. Shutter, I'm going to bump that up to 30. I'm going to leave the rest of these settings here alone as they are. For white balance, I'm going to put that down to native because we can tweak the white balance to our liking later on when editing the photos. ISO min and max I'm going to set to 800 for both. Sharpness I'm going to set to low. And color I'm going to set to flat. And I think we are through all of the modes. And I still have 31% left on the Enduro battery. And I don't think it started fully charged either. I think when I put it in, I think it had a few percent off there. So that is my complete unboxing and setup guide for the Hero 12 Black. Hope you found this video useful, and I hope you have a great time with your Hero 12 Black. So if you're not a subscriber already, I definitely encourage you to hit the subscribe and bell notification button so you'll be notified every time I publish a new video. I've got a lot more GoPro content, and I'd love to have you here as part of the great community at this channel. Until we talk again, happy GoProing.